Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Welcome to this webinar hosted by AVIAtest. Before we start, I would like to say thank you for joining, and I hope that you're safe and that everywhere people are staying healthy in face of this very dire situation we're facing. Okay. We've had many people announcing their presence. For that also I would like to thank you. It's really giving us a warm heart to see the support we have from everybody. Then I would like to apologize if anything goes wrong during the broadcast, as the technical conditions are a little bit fabricated. We've been putting this together quite last minute because of the current situation, and if anything goes wrong, hopefully there will be a recording that will be available to see for everyone after the show. So maybe in a day or two, we will upload the video of this event. Okay. So once again, welcome. I'm happy to see you here. My name is Jeff. I'm a former air traffic controller, and I've worked about 20 years in the industry. Now I am a other certified language assessment rater, as well as an instructor for Part FCL. Today, as we announced, I will be talking about emergency communications, what should happen, or what you should say when something wrong happens in your airplane, or if you're an air traffic controller, what you should expect, or what you could expect from pilots who are experiencing an emergency in their flight. Okay, we're taking. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit distracted because I keep receiving notifications and questions, and it's very, very nice. Sometimes you will see me reaching for a screen or another computer, just to follow up with the development and the people who are joining us. Okay, so the subject of today is emergency communications, as I've said. And we're going to start by talking a little bit more about what state of emergency you could be in, and hopefully you will never encounter it, but all right. The first thing that we would need to discuss is the difference between distress and urgency. If we take a look at ICAO documentation, we will see quite quickly that the difference lies in one concept. It lies in in how immediate the pilot needs assistance. So if as a pilot you ever face difficulties in your flights and you're still wondering whether or not to declare an emergency, and if so, what type of emergency you should declare, my first advice to you will be go with your instincts. How do you feel? If you feel that you are in grave danger, or that you need immediate assistance from the controller or from the ground, this qualifies as a situation of distress. That is very, very important. And as such, another concept that I would like to emphasize is that if you are not certain of the situation in which you are, if you have doubts, and you don't know how to react, because by experience, emergency situations happen quite rarely. Distress situations, even more rarely. And what's important to know is that at the moment that you start feeling in danger, or that you have doubts about the safety of your aircraft or its occupants, say it. When in doubt, shout. Okay? This is very, very important because as a controller, and the controllers who are watching me today will certainly understand what I'm talking about here. The earlier you talk to controllers about your problems, the more times the controllers will have to help you, of course. Well, that's a little bit obvious. But also, you can start explaining things when you still have time to do it. Because as the situation develops, it may start being too much for you to handle. And don't take me wrong, I'm not criticizing anyone's ability, but if you're facing technical difficulties with the aircraft, for example, these technical difficulties may at some point need your full attention. And that would be the point at which you no longer have time to talk to controllers and explain what's going on and what you need from them. So please, try to remember this. If you are in doubt about the safety of your airplane, or why did you declare an emergency, this is not worth it, or no. This will never happen. This is very important. Mark my words here. If you feel like you're in danger, you have to say it. Okay, so back onto our ICAO definition, if I would like to say so. What ICAO says is that distress is a situation of being threatened by a grave and imminent danger and of requiring immediate assistance. Now, this is the most accurate definition we could get, actually. And what you should remember from it is that if you need immediate assistance, if you want to land immediately, if you want to be the first one on the ground, even if there are 200 other airplanes flying, I'm exaggerating, of course, but that's exactly the moment where you want to call it a mayday, tell the controllers, okay, look, I fear for my life here, I fear for my passengers, I fear for my aircraft, we need to land. And in that time, okay, the controllers will do something about it, don't worry. The situation of urgency, on the other hand, is a little bit more broad in terms of what it can encompass. Urgency is defined by ICAO as a condition concerning the safety of an aircraft or another vehicle or some person on board or within sight, but which does not require immediate assistance. This is quite interesting because, as you can see, it means that there are many things that will allow or require you to trigger an urgency situation with control. For example, and I like to use this example when I teach to pilot students. Let's imagine that you're overflying a lake or a sea, or like, I don't know, you're going to Great Britain and crossing the Channel, and you see a boat that capsized and people are swimming around it. Well, that does actually quite well fulfill the criteria of an emergency situation. You have persons within sight, you can call it a pan-pan, and air traffic controllers will try to help as much as they can. Now, we can't, of course, as air traffic controllers, there are not a lot of things we can do all the time. But for example, well, one thing that happened to me, one day I was working a very quiet day, and somebody training in the circuit called and said, "Oh, we see a house on fire, and then there are no fire trucks around it." So we did eventually investigate through the fire brigades of the city, and they said, "Okay, we don't know, so we're going to go see and look into it." And eventually they did send the fire trucks and then responded to the emergency. And this is exactly what I mean when I say, if you see something, say something. All right. The most important thing I would say is don't try to hide things from controllers. It's not about maybe not hiding, but if something's going wrong, don't keep it to yourself, all right? Nobody's going to ever make fun of you or going to get back at you for declaring an emergency, even if afterwards it turns out that it was not so serious after all. But the thing is, if you ask for help, you will receive it. But if you don't, well, of course, then controllers can't figure it out by themselves. And they won't ask everybody every 2 minutes, okay, you're sure you don't need help there or there or there? No. If you need something, ask for it. Okay? Same if you're becoming lost somewhere. Don't hesitate to say you're lost. I mean, nowadays when you drive in your car, all right, it's become much easier, of course. But back in the day, there were people who never would stop on the side of the street and then ask some passerby, oh, excuse me, could you show me the way to the post office, please? And then they would circle around the town for like 2 hours looking for the post office. But here in the airplane, it's pretty much the same. If you're lost, say it. The controllers have a lot of equipment, and for them it will take maybe, 30 seconds to spot you, to tell you where you are, to tell you what kind of airspace is around you, what traffic is around you, if you have restricted or prohibited zones, if you need to contact somebody else because you're about to enter a controlled airspace. Yeah, that's super, super easy for us to do. This being said, I understand how difficult, how nerve-wracking it must be to be in an airplane riddled with problems. And sometimes it may not always be easy to remember the book. Oh, what do I have to say? It's all right. You're in an emergency. ICAO to say a few things, yes. There are guidelines as to what you should say in case of emergency. Mayday, 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 the call sign of the unit, the ATS unit, your call sign, type of aircraft, emergency, etc., etc., your intentions. But again, you're in an emergency, and I'm not saying that the whole regulations fly out the window, but pretty much, actually, the main goal of the controller at that moment will be to make sure that you go back to the ground safely for you, for your passengers, for your airplane. And okay, if there needs to be a discussion about rules or whatever, don't worry, we'll take care of that after. And again, nobody will ever get back to you like, why did you declare an emergency? This was not worth it. Not at all. However, there's when I talk to you about the structure of the message, okay, there is a structure, and I just told you, okay, if you don't remember it, if you don't do it by the book, it's completely okay. No worries. But there may be a few things that you can take home with you after this seminar, and will make everybody's life easier if you can remember them. And that would be how many persons on board your aircraft. Anyway, that part of information, that piece of information, sorry, controllers will ask for it if you don't say it yourself. They will ask because they will have to report to the rescue services how many persons on board and how much fuel on board. But also, it may be useful to tell the controller, hey, I'm just a private pilot. I only fly VFR. Or I'm a solo student. Because then the controller will also know how to handle your emergency and what they can expect from you in terms of experience. And again, it's nothing derogatory or nothing bad to say, I'm just a student, I don't know anything. This is my second flight solo, I'm really in trouble. It's okay. It's even better because then the controller can help you more efficiently. They know what they can ask from you, from your level of experience. Also can be very useful to mention what equipment you have on board your little aircraft. If you have an ELT, for example, that would be wonderful. If you have a GPS and you can use it, okay, in case you're lost, then the controller can help you set up the GPS somehow. All right? Okay, so this is the general philosophy behind emergency communications. The main goal of the controller will be to assist you until you're safely back on the ground. All right. Okay, so before we carry on, I would like to thank everybody who sent their questions. It's great to see so much enthusiasm about it. And if after the webinar, because I'm sure it will happen to some of you, something comes like, oh my, I knew I had to ask something and I forgot it now I know what I wanted to ask. It's okay. The page where you could register, the page where you can send questions will still be open, and you can also PM us on our Facebook profile. We'll attend to your questions afterwards. It's completely okay. But we'll now examine a few questions that we received and greet some of our watchers, some of our audience. The first question we received is, what would happen if I was to fly VFR in a small general aviation airplane? We just enter the control zone with the intention to land at a controlled aerodrome. It's weekend, beautiful weather, the traffic is quite heavy. So I'm sure you can all relate to that time when you enter the control zone and there was a lot of traffic. And there was also a lot of traffic on the frequency, of course. So everybody was trying to catch the controller's attention by placing his call as fast as possible. And then the odd thing happens. Your engine starts coughing, starts behaving with, okay. The question I follow is, what is your advice? Should I declare a distress situation or try to enter communication and just describe the situation with the engine? Okay, there's not much to think about here. As a controller, I would tell you, if that situation happens to you, it's clear and simple. That's a mayday call. Because your engine is unsure, you're in a small airplane. Let's say that it's a single engine airplane. Well, your only means of staying airborne shows signs of weakness, and maybe it will fail shortly. It seems to me like you are threatened by a grave and imminent danger, because maybe you're overflying a big city and you have nowhere to land. So if I was in that situation as a pilot, I would call it a mayday immediately. And tell the controller, okay, this is a situation and I want to land as soon as possible because I'm not sure how long the engine is still going to survive. That's perfectly okay. And to build on that a little bit, because it's a question that also I received many times. What is the boundary between distress and urgency, or between a mayday and a pan-pan? I can only say one thing. That difference is up to the pilot. If you feel like you need immediate assistance, I know I'm repeating myself, but it's because it's very important. If you feel like you need immediate assistance, ask for it, and you will be given. The administrative consequences, of declaring a mayday or a pan-pan, well, EASA tells us that if there's a safety-related occurrence, we should report it, and that's a very good idea. That's the best thing you can do. Once you manage to land, you handle your emergency situation, you go back to the ground. Well, after you've had time to debrief with the controller or with an instructor or the flying school or whoever, and take a deep breath and just contemplate that you did survive an emergency. Well, there is a very good website online called AVIationreporting.eu. So on this website, you can report voluntarily, and that's really interesting for private pilots and general aviation, because I know that if you're an air traffic controller, your ANSP probably has provided you with very clear instructions on what and how to report, the famous Form B, which is different than for pilots. And if you're a professional pilot, CPL or ATPL, or you work for a company, then also your company has provided you with instructions on how to report safety-related occurrences. But this being said, on top of this mandatory reporting, this aviationreporting.eu website, which is again a great tool from EASA, is providing everybody with a chance to report on a safety occurrence and enable everybody to learn from an occurrence. Now, and I want to divert here just a little, in case any of our friends from EASA is watching today. I have had personally reports that in some EASA member states, the practice of aviation reporting is somewhat discouraged because there are still places where the local regulations or habits are very strict with people and somewhat deter them out of reporting, out of fear of retribution from the authorities. So if anyone from EASA hears me here, maybe it's a long shot or it's a bottle in the sea, but maybe that would be a good idea to address these issues with local authorities, with the CAAs, and make sure that everybody's on the same line and accepts that a just culture is finally here to foster a better environment for pilots, and that it will eventually lead to an increase of the reporting and therefore of safety. Alright, so let's take a look at our next question. Our next question comes from Belgium, from Dominic, who describes his location as isolated. Well, no surprise about that, is there? And Dominic is asking us to clarify the best communications practice regarding the specific type of situation for both pilot and ATC that is triggered by fuel starvation. Right, so how it goes is that there are two messages that a pilot can send to air traffic control about fuel problems. The first one is minimum fuel. minimum fuel, basically when you tell that to a controller, you notify them that if anything changes in your current clearance, that you will end up landing with less than the planned reserve. So to make this clear, it is not an emergency, of course. What you're just saying is that, okay, I have committed to land in aerodrome A, and the clearance you gave me is okay, but that's my minimum fuel. By doing that, I will be reaching the minimum fuel that I had planned. This being said, it also involves something for controllers here, because as a controller, if you're working with somebody who calls you minimum fuel, it means that, okay, let's imagine somebody's in the holding at 7,000 feet, and for traffic reasons you need to climb them back up to 8,000 feet. That is a significant change of clearance, because it involves extra fuel consumption. Right? Just to keep that in mind when you're handling a traffic that has declared minimum fuel. Back to the general subject for everybody. Declaring minimum fuel does not confirm any sort of priority. This is very important. If you are at a stage of emergency, or you're reaching a stage in your fuel status that says no, now I need priority, I need to land, this is not minimum fuel anymore. If you feel that you are in a fuel emergency, then there's only one thing to say, and that's Mayday fuel. Mayday fuel means I need immediate assistance, I need to land. Alright? This is very clear, and EASA has issued this in a safety information bulletin 2018-08 for those who are interested. And it's a very, very clear thing to do. If you are in a state where you need immediate assistance because your fuel reserves are so low, then it's Mayday fuel. Alright, I'm going to let that sink in for 2 seconds. But if you just say minimum fuel, it doesn't mean you need assistance. It doesn't mean you need priority to land. If you do need priority to land, then it's Mayday fuel. I know that it's very difficult for pilots to declare an emergency. From a psychological point of view, it's completely understandable. But once again, coming back on what we told, on what I told you earlier today, the whole point of declaring an emergency is to give air traffic controllers the time and the resources to help you best. So I know once again that it's difficult to declare an emergency, but when it's the right course of action, please do it. Alright, I hope this clears up the fuel thing. Again, minimum fuel meaning I'm still okay to fly, but if my clearance changes, if I need to divert, if I need to do anything else than what my current clearance is leading me to, then it means that I will probably end up being in trouble, and for certain I will be landing with less than the planned reserves. Alright. The next question comes from Pavel in Slovakia. And we're going to talk a little bit about radio communication failures. Alright. Radio communication failures are quite a tricky thing. Because the first, I'm not going to come back on that, maybe it will be the subject of another webinar, because it is a very, very wide array of things we need to talk about. But to keep it short, what's the most important to know in case of radio failure, if you suspect that you have it, just ascertain that something's wrong, try placing a test call. and try to at least understand the nature of the failure, if it's only the receiver or if the transmitter is also broken. ATC will try and contact you, etc. There will be things done. But what to do in case of... the question is actually, what should I do if I have a radio failure after entering a control zone with an intention to land at a controlled airport? The whole point of issuing clearances to traffic in controlled airspace is to provide them with instructions going far enough so that if something happens, the controller can have a plan B. So my advice, and what's most accepted amongst air traffic controllers is that if you have a radio failure after receiving a clearance, go to the end of the clearance. If, for example, you were told to fly to join downwind, for example, well, join downwind. Once you're there, the tower will establish visual contact somehow. Will try to send light signals if they have a light gun. The last tower I worked, the light gun was kind of broken because my colleague broke it. It's okay, it happens, accidents happen. Once you're reaching or you're approaching the term of your clearance, then the tower will try and arrange the rest of the flight for you. And in all cases, this is another very good incentive to make you read the AIP. I know it's not very readable, it's not a very pleasant document to read, but still it's very interesting. And in the AIP, you will, in a lot of cases, if not all, in the vast majority of cases, you will find for each airport, for each controlled airport, a procedure to follow in case of radio communications failure in VFR. Right? For IFR pilots, it's again another subject. There's a very detailed procedure. To keep it short, basically you have to follow the last acknowledged instruction until a certain point, then fly your flight plan until your planned destination and try to land as close as possible to the ETA. Okay, we'll cut it short here because it's really a long procedure. Alright, we're coming to our last question, which is again from Slovakia, and it's about a very specific element of radio telephony called transmitting blind. There is a phrase saying transmitting blind due to receiver failure mentioned by ICAO. The question is, could we briefly go through situations where transmitting blind is required? It appears to be a habit in Slovakia to use blind transmission when calling a local ATZ operator, or a local ATZ frequency at least, and no one answers to the initial call, or no one is expected to answer because the pilot knows that they're flying into a place that is unmanned. Alright. I don't have any beef with any authority at all, and I understand that every country has their specifics. However, transmitting blind, according to ICAO, the phrase transmitting blind is specifically reserved for cases where your receiver has failed, where your radio receiver has failed. I know that, okay, if it's customary to use it, I of course can't do much from here, from this meeting room, to change it, but what I can tell you is that the day you're going to go fly abroad and use that phrase, use transmitting blind, because you don't expect anybody to be on the ground handling the radio, if anybody else hears you, they're going to trigger a search and rescue operation. They're going to notify air traffic services that somebody has a radio failure, because everywhere I've worked, every other controller I've met, every other pilot I've met from any other country know this from ICAO, that transmitting blind is reserved for a radio failure situation. So I can only advertise the fact of not doing that anymore and reserving that sentence for situations where it's actually designed for. Do not say transmitting blind if you're calling an aerodrome where you know nobody is working. It's okay. The frequency, the self-information frequencies are even described as being self-information or air-to-air on the chart in the manuals. So when you see A/A on a chart meaning air-to-air, you don't expect anybody to answer from the ground. It says air-to-air, self-information. So you don't need to specify that you're transmitting blind, because everybody knows it's an air-to-air frequency. Alright. Now, I would like to wrap this up and thank everybody for watching. It was a great pleasure doing this webinar. It will be available for downloads in a few days. Time for our technical teams to get the file from the server and re-upload it. I don't know exactly. Do all the dirty work around the video and everything. And what I can already tell you is that we'll keep on doing this. So hopefully next week, next Sunday, we'll come with another webinar to offer. Until then, stay safe and stay healthy. I wish you all a very good week, a very good Sunday evening, and until next week then. Bye bye.